Welcome back, Social Studies 10. It's great to review with you here today. At the end of this video, you should have a greater understanding of Related Issue 1, which is chapters 1 to 4 of the textbook, and you would think is a quarter of the course, but it's not. It was an introduction to the course, but it's been many, many weeks since we've talked about it, so let's see how much you remember. So here we go. What is something you remember about Related Issue 1? It starts with globalization. That sounds like the best first line of a book I would never read. It starts with globalization, right?
And it means the interconnectedness of people.
And it does mean that. That's two great things right there. It starts globalization, the entire course, globalization, and the definition, interconnectedness of us.
It has 3 dimensions:
Three main dimensions, yes.
social, economic, and political.
Those are the three main dimensions, social, economic, and political. Yes, sir. There's another dimension too, cultural, yeah. We didn't focus on it as much because I'm like a white Irish guy. I'm pretty bland when it comes to culture. But, you know, if I was more of an interesting teacher, we probably would have done more of that. You know, if I was like anyone else, probably. But yeah, no, there's a cultural dimension, there's an economic, political, social dimension. These are all great points. What do we know about the economic dimension? How can we physically quantify that we are economically connected with people around the world? What would be a little thing we could do, a demonstration in class that we could do to just show to what extent we're connected? We could eat bananas. Oh, you know what? We have bananas. We have bananas here today. Now, am I going to eat a banana just to show this?
Yes. Yeah.
I'll eat a banana.
Okay, you can have this one.
Oh,
Yeah, he's going to eat this banana, and I'll eat this banana. He gets the one that's maybe, what would you call that, overripe, and I get the one that's going to taste like decent. So come on up. So while we eat the bananas, can anybody, I'm probably not going to eat the banana on camera. Can somebody remind us about why we study bananas? Like, what did we learn about bananas?
they're imported goods. they're imported goods.
I thought you were going to say they're important because they contain potassium.
No.
But they are important because another country, because of their climate, they can produce bananas at a per unit, lower cost. What do we call that term? What do we call that term when El Salvador and Nicaragua and Honduras? There's your cultural globalization. What do we call that term when some countries can produce bananas cheaper than others? What do they have?
Economic scale.
An economy of scale, yeah. So Canada has an economy of scale. We're the major producer of what in the world? How's that banana? Is that right? A little right. Do you want some rotten milk to wash that down? It looks like a no on the rotten milk. What does Canada have an economy of scale of? Maple syrup and wheat and not bananas because we don't have the climate. So we import that. That's a big part of globalization. It's a big part of the economic sense. How do we study social globalization this year?
We look at media.
We looked at media and how media can influence what we see as normal behavior. And under the big umbrella of media, we learned words like, what do we use the word when media is owned by very few people? A monopoly, yeah, there's a near monopoly of it. It's a C word, media. Is that a C? Media. Media convergence, right? We have a concentration of ownership of media, and then there's a convergence of the story as the media spins the story to promote a certain narrative, to promote profitability, and they're not performing the role they're meant to do. What is the role the media is meant to play?
They're a
Watchdog, yeah, watchdog. Did you get that? Yeah, but small. Nailed it, brother. That's 100%. Now we also watched the corporation of Fox News not allowing the investigators to be a watchdog when they found RBGH in the milk in Florida because a company said, "Hey, we don't want the bad advertisement." What company said? Monsanto. Yeah, Monsanto said that. So that's media. When we looked at social globalization, what else did we study? Waves of feminism. Yeah. Social media influencers. So I bragged about having, 21 followers. And then you guys said, that's not impressive. And I said, well, on YouTube, I've got at least maybe 2 people will watch this video. I'm a big thing on YouTube. In Indonesia, they watch this because they just like to learn about Alberta. Because, one day it'll all be Alberta. One day.
Oh, that's like homogenization.
Whoa! You just did that! You saved me there! I went all creepy, like fascists were taking over the world, and you said, no, that's homogenization he's talking about. So as a consequence of globalization, we have homogenization, global sameness. There's a linguistic dimension of that, right? A lack of lack of diversity, right? Lack of diversity. We see homogenization linguistically. It's all English everywhere. But what's another example? You go to Saudi Arabia and you might see what kind of store, and you're like, man, we have that back in Wetaskiwin. McDonald's, or a pawn shop, or a liquor store, or a place to buy some marijuana. Now, those are not corporations that you're like, oh man, there's a Stampede pawn shop. You're not probably going to see that in Reykjavik in Iceland, but you're going to see McDonald's, you're going to see Walmart. You're going to see these nations, these corporations that seem to not belong to one nation anymore, but many. What term do we use to describe something that's kind of blurry? We don't know what nation it belongs to. Transnational! That's the term! You know what? This banana's a little chalky because it's not ripe at all. So maybe your banana choice wasn't bad. Name that group of people. 1973. War breaks out in the Middle East. As a consequence of the war, there's an oil embargo against the West. As a consequence of that, there's people that are going to say, we need oil. So they go into this traditional land in northern Alberta, and they disrupt the traditional lifestyle of change identities of people living there. Who are the people that had their identities affected? Yes, sir! Lubicon Cree that live on Treaty what land? Treaty 8 land, you're right. We are on Treaty 6, they live on Treaty 8. Impressive. Give them 2 checks for that. I want to say we also talked about assimilation. How does the phenomenon of assimilation connect to Western Canada's history? What is the connection there? Residential schools. So assimilation is a stain on Canadian history as Canada's federal government tried to Europeanize Canada's First Nations by having them, young children, attend residential schools. And at these residential schools, there was no tolerance for diversity. There's no tolerance for non-Europeanized cultures, as they were trying to eliminate any connection to history and language and culture that the children would have. And this didn't happen just 100 years ago. Even in the 1960s, there's a time we call the 60s scoop, when the federal government went around, used the RCMP, and literally pulled children from families. And many families in our area were affected by it. So that's assimilation. We talked about homogenization. What is the term used to describe when we make room for other cultures? Accommodation, acculturation. Acculturation, we're making room. Accommodation, for example, in the RCMP with turbans instead of Stetsons. That's a creaky chair. Hybridization. Sometimes with globalization, you might see something that is it's kind of a hybrid. So they might have their own local version of something. So in South Africa, there's a show where they have a character that has HIV, so it's more relatable to the children who watch the show. What show am I talking about? Sesame Street. Take me down. What? How does the theme song go? Dun 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 dun. Sesame Street. Does that make sense, Chase? Is that how it goes? I think that's how it goes. Revitalization of culture, techno-isolation. Talked about those. We also looked at the idea of linguistic diversity. Some languages are being lost because nobody's speaking them anymore. Parlez-vous français? Who speaks French in here? Anyone? I certainly do not. I tried to, but then I didn't have enough opportunity to use it. So many languages are dying because there's not opportunities to use them. So we see a lack of linguistic diversity as a consequence of globalization. So you can see some questions about that on the exam as well. Technology both unites us but also can isolate us with techno-isolationism. We talked about that. We talked about the impact of our economic activities, the externality of that creating a negative impact on biodiversity, coltan mining on the mountain gorillas in the Congo. Anything else that we mentioned this morning? Anything else? Disparity means have and have not, rich and poor. We have the technological disparity, right? Techno divide. Some people have like iPhone, whatever it is now. Some people don't even have iPhones. So we have the technological divide. So we have disparity in terms of that. We have disparity in terms of caloric intake. We have people that starve to death, and we have people that eat too much. So we have disparity, have and have not, rich and poor. Any other concepts? Yes? CRTC. I always forget about them. But they regulate what I can do. They want to make sure that we are not losing our culture. They want to make sure we don't become Americanized. You know, we're living next to a cultural giant, and we could have our identity compromised because of the attraction of just adopting their identity. So radio, telecommunications, there's a regulation on how much content has to be Canadian. So that's the CRTC, a government agency. How should governments respond in the face of homogenization? Canada created the CRTC and said, we're going to make sure that there's a certain percentage of the content on TV that is Canadian made, or the content on the music or on the radio that is Canadian music. Anything else we looked at in related issue 1?
They passed the multiculturalism act.
Yeah, so Canada, our Prime Minister at the time in the 1960s, Pierre Trudeau, he's looking down at the United States, a country that was very divided, and he said that we want to keep Canada united, and we want to have Canada to be a safe place, and he passed multiculturalism, the idea that we will celebrate plurality rather than try to create, homogenization and assimilation. At the same time he's doing that, they were doing residential schools. So there is definitely a disconnect between what the Liberal government was saying that they were trying to do and what they actually did with their actions. Anything else we looked at in related issue 1? Yes? Sweatshops. As a negative part of the economic activities, there's going to be exploitation. We certainly talked about Forrest Gump. I can't remember in what context. Something about running.
Running.
You're gonna run to the Berkeley and then you
I was gonna run. Yeah, it was all about me running because I'm a sprinter. I can sprint. I'm a runner. Anything else related to issue 1?
Wholesale.
I think that's related to issue 1. What we're going to get you to do, review related issue 1 and preview chapters 5 to 9. So 5, 6, 7, 8, not 9. So just 5 to 8. And then we're going to look at historic globalization tomorrow. Control